Well, I've been sitting here with my thoughts on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, revisiting and revising the script over and over as my impressions settle after my first blind playthrough. Many of you saw that journey finish, the annoyance, the hype, the confusion, and the moments where the game actually stunned me. Most of you already know my history with the original Bloodlines, years of playthroughs, min-max builds, mods, and deep dives. So yes, I went into this sequel with a mix of excitement and caution. The long delays and studio shakeups and rough development cycle had everyone skeptical, including me. Then release day hit, and it was rough. Well, that's true of everything, isn't it? It's the inside that counts. Uh-oh. We got a little stutter. We got a little hiccup. Are we going to recover? Or did we just freeze up? I think we just froze up. The game barely ran unless I launched it as an admin. Crashes, freezes, and bugs. Deja vu straight back from 2004. It wasn't a great first impression. But enough of backstory. Now it's time to dig into the game itself, the combat, the mechanics, the story, and everything that makes Bloodlines 2 both frustrating, rage-inducing, and fascinating at the same time. Let's just start things off with the question everyone's been asking. As the title card said, should this even be called Bloodlines 2? Well, probably not. If this game had launched under a title that actually reflected its own story or its protagonist, something like Vampire the Masquerade the Nomad, as I've been kind of like hinting at throughout the entire blind playthrough, I think the reaction would have been very different. It would have given the game room to stand on its own instead of forcing an immediate comparison to the cult classic it was never built to replicate. I'm calling it Bloodlines drags in 20 years of expectations around systems, role-playing depth, and world design that this sequel simply doesn't deliver. That single branding choice set it up for scrutiny it could never realistically dodge. The original Bloodlines was an RPG in the classic sense. Messy, janky, brilliant, but it handed you real control. You built your character from the ground up with in-depth stats, attribute-based combat, meaningful dialogue options, and the freedom to shape your vampire into whatever you wanted, pretty much. I mean, Bloodlines 2 simply doesn't offer that. Instead, you're working with an ability tree tied entirely to clan disciplines, and that's basically the whole system. There's not much depth beyond choosing which powers you want slotted in. Character customization fares a little better, more options than the original technically, but it's still limited to surface level tweaks like hair, eye color, makeup, and outfits, and with no third-person view, you only see these cosmetics in cutscenes anyways. Well, back to disciplines. For players who try to stick to their clan's identity, you hit the ceiling fast. Within the first 5 to 6 hours, you can unlock all of your core clan disciplines, and once that happens, progression starts to feel capped, especially if your playstyle leans heavily into that clan fantasy. Now, opening up all other clans' passives and disciplines is a great way to flesh out your build, but getting there demands a fair bit of grinding. At the time of this review, I've already completed my second playthrough, and I spent a huge chunk of the early game farming resonances just to have clan passives ready to unlock once I gained the necessary amount of ability points. Personally, I don't mind the grind for resonances. I found a few strategies that make it tolerable, but for players with less patience, it may test your limits. I think I went on a tangent here. Let's go. Moving on. During my blind playthrough, I did experiment by unlocking a few additional powers to mix things up, but experimentation was frustrating due to the limitations of the Blood Pip system, in which I'll go into a little bit more depth later. On top of that, I'm the kind of player who finds a build that feels powerful and thematically consistent and then commits to it, so my experimentation in that regard was pretty limited. On my second playthrough, I opened up more to the idea of ability and combat experimentation. Now, I'll admit, my mindset going into Bloodlines 2 initially was pretty rigid when it came to experimenting with other clan disciplines. I wanted to play a Ventrue, not some Ventrue Toreador Tremere hybrid. But if you go into this game expecting a one-to-one recreation of the 5e tabletop, you're going to severely limit yourself and be incredibly disappointed. Bloodlines 2 treats disciplines more like a toolkit rather than strict clan identity, and if you're willing to bend a little, there's actually some fun to be found in mixing things up. And honestly, experimenting with those builds is pretty painless. Seattle's rooftops are crawling with enemy groups, so it's easy to test out a build, see if your setup holds up in a real fight, and move on without wasting much time. Once you get comfortable with the combat and know what each encounter demands, swapping disciplines becomes a real advantage. Take the Tremere's recall discipline. It's fun and clever when you're planning an ambush, but in the middle of a chaotic fight, you often don't have the space or time to set it up, and that's where switching comes in. If you've unlocked another ability in the same tree, you could replace recall with something far more immediate, like split second for the Banu Hakim. Both powers are relocate abilities, so you can't run them together, but split second costs only 2 blood pips. Pair that with a Toreador passive that refreshes relocate abilities, and you can fire it off repeatedly in combat. It turns frantic encounters into something you can actually control, or at least ride the chaos with a bit more style. Dialogue experimentation is a whole different beast. With the game currently offering only autosaves and checkpoints, no manual saves at all, choosing dialogue becomes a lot riskier. If you pick an option that doesn't fit your playstyle, that's it. The game immediately autosaves and overwrites your previous progress, locking in that choice whether you meant it or not. Now you can reload an earlier checkpoint, but those checkpoints are spaced out enough that you're still stuck replaying chunks of a chapter if you want to try alternative choices or strategies. Now it's not a total loss, but it's far from ideal, especially in a game where experimentation should be part of the fun. So combat limitations. What happens when you die and restart at the beginning of an encounter, but you're weaker than when you first went in? So we're going to have to just... Okay, so here's what happened. I've had to restart this fight 2 times, and it saves everything that you progressed, right? So technically these people all should be dead, or the ones that I fought should be dead, but they're not. Those guys come back, but guess what doesn't come back? My elixirs. I used 2 elixirs, I used 2 or 3 elixirs. I used 2 or 3 elixirs in the last round before I was killed, and those don't respawn. These assholes do. Let's say you popped a few elixirs to get through the fight, but still died. When you respawn, those elixirs are gone. They don't respawn, but the enemies do. Even if you'd already cleared most of the group before getting killed, every single one comes back, and those precious finite elixirs you relied on are gone for good. If a player is already struggling with an encounter with their items, how exactly are they supposed to perform better when those items vanish after death? It creates a bizarre feedback loop where every failure leaves you weaker than before. And if the encounter is tuned tightly enough that those items are practically required, then the player possibly may get soft-locked and may have to turn down the difficulty in order to get through that encounter. At that point, the game isn't challenging, it's frustrating. I also want to throw in one more piece of advice when it comes to combat design. Let players bypass encounters. A real stealth path should have been baked into the core design of Bloodlines 2. It flirts with the idea, but most of the time you're locked in a room until you chew through waves of enemies. That lack of choice really stings. Being forced into combat over and over is going to grate on players who want more variety, or simply prefer brains and finesse over brawling. I'll wrap this chapter up by saying, take what I've said so far with a grain of salt. I played on the hardest difficulty, so the combat curve was already steep, and I was a new player. Of course, things are going to be a bit tougher, but with that in mind, I stand by everything I've said. The system sometimes undercuts the player instead of pushing them to adapt. Oh, and give us back our damn elixirs. Now, after all my gripes in Chapter 3, I actually really enjoyed the combat in Bloodlines 2, though there were a couple of caveats. The few I've already mentioned, and one I'll touch on a bit later. You can move around freely, find advantageous positions, and even use the environment to your benefit, blowing up objects or injuring enemies in clever ways. Clan disciplines open the door for some really satisfying setups and combos. For example, I'd start by using the Tremere discipline Cauldron of Blood on one target. As his buddies rushed in to help, I'd follow up with Venture's Mass Manipulation, then finish it with Terminal Decree to wipe out a whole group in one go. Watching that chain reaction unfold, super satisfying. And if any enemies survived, I'd hit them with possessions so they turn on each other before I stepped in to clean up the rest. That kind of layered strategy, combining powers, positioning, and timing, is genuinely fun to me, even if I never quite perfected it. As some of you know, in the heat of combat, panic hits fast, and all that careful planning sometimes goes straight out the window. I've seen some people say the combat is boring, but honestly, for me, it hits a sweet spot. It's not overly complex, but it feels powerful and rewarding when everything clicks. One thing I really dig about Bloodlines 2 is the movement. That sense of speed and agility when you're maneuvering the Nomad over Seattle skyline. Sure, you could just run, follow the streets, and take the normal route to your next objective, but where's the fun in that? Getting up onto a rooftop, sprinting at full vampire speed, leaping from building to building, smashing through random anarch gangs that get in your way, and then dropping 5 stories straight to the pavement like a super boss, that's rad. That fast, fluid movement gives the game a kinetic energy that really sells the fantasy of being a powerful predator. Just be careful how you get to those rooftops, though. A breach of the Masquerade can send the police swarming your location, forcing you to hide out and wait for the heat to die down. And if you completely break the Masquerade, you'll get staked on the spot by the Camarilla, losing a portion of your resonance points in the process. Depending on your playstyle, that might not sound like a big deal. But if you rely on resonance to unlock and experiment with new clan disciplines, losing a significant chunk of those points can be a huge setback. For anybody wondering what resonance points actually are, they're earned when feeding on humans with different emotional flavors or resonances. It's choleric, melancholic, and sanguine, or sanguine, one of those, each tied to specific clan powers. It's a cool mechanic on paper and adds a bit of strategy to how you feed, though in practice, it may not drastically change your playthrough unless you're really chasing certain ability unlocks. A major misstep is the lack of a proper inventory system, the absence of a meaningful economy, and side quests that can feel dull and repetitive. When it comes to side quests, you can skip them, but if you're a completionist like me, leaving them unfinished just doesn't sit right. On top of that, they grant experience points needed to unlock other clan perks and disciplines, so if you're aiming to fully max out your build, every scrap of experience matters, making even the most tedious side quests feel essential. In my opinion, the side quests in the final third of the game finally start to show some actual substance. They feel more intentional, more connected to the world, and a little closer to what they should have been all along. But by the time they hit that stride, it's hard not to feel like it's too little too late. In the original Bloodlines, scavenging for or buying weapons, managing your inventory, and interacting with a basic economy added a few layers of strategy and immersion. You had to think about what to spend money on and which items would help in certain situations. If you played your cards right, you get special items that would permanently boost your stats in a significant way. Bloodlines 2 strips all of that away. There is no loot system, and there is almost no reward for exploring or experimenting other than tiny doses of experience points, which, again, you need if you want those ability unlocks. This lack of depth is a glaring missed opportunity. It's the kind of design choice that makes the world feel smaller and less alive than it should. Alright, since the game is called Bloodlines 2, I have to compare it to the first Bloodlines. So as we go into this chapter, unlike Bloodlines 2004, where you had a single blood pool to draw from when using clan disciplines, Bloodlines 2 switches things up with a blood pip system. Each discipline now requires your pips to be filled before you can use it. I'm not a big fan of this mechanic. It feels restrictive and it ends up limiting what you can actually do in combat. Once you use a discipline, those pips are gone until you either feed again or pop a blood elixir. I also hit stretches of the game that were just flat out punishing. I'd run into groups of enemies I couldn't feed on, which meant I had no way to restore my blood pips. And no blood pips means no vampiric powers. You're basically fighting with one hand tied behind your back. It turns encounters that should feel empowering into frustrating slogs where you're stuck chipping away at enemies with none of the abilities that are supposed to define you as a vampire. Remember a few paragraphs back when I said I enjoyed combat but I do have caveats? Well, here's the other caveat. In the original Bloodlines, you could tap into your blood pool freely, using your powers as much as you wanted until you were fully drained. That made you feel like a true vampire, constantly weighing power against hunger. The pip system, on the other hand, reduces that dynamic to a stop-and-go rhythm. It's less fluid, and honestly, it takes away from some of the specialness of being a creature fueled by blood. You want to be able to unleash your abilities throughout a fight, to feel like a supernatural predator dominating the battlefield. But instead, once your pips are gone, you're left swinging away with melee attacks or scrambling for environmental weapons until you can feed again. And if you feed during combat, just know that when you're stuck in a kill animation, enemies can still hit, damage, and potentially kill you, and you can't do anything about it. These things aren't deal breakers, but they definitely dull the edge of what should feel like raw vampiric power. I should also add one more thing to this section, something that kind of bothered me when I was in my playthrough. There's no real consequence for hitting 0 blood. The Nomad grumbles, Fabian nags you, and that's about it. There's no urgency, no creeping desperation that comes with running on empty. In the original game, letting your blood pool tank meant risking a full-on frenzy. The beast taking the wheel, blowing your cover, and triggering humanity loss and mortal or kindred retaliation. Bloodlines 2 drops that tension entirely, and without that danger, going dry just doesn't mean much. I think Bloodlines 2 gets the music and atmosphere just right. The soundtrack sets the tone perfectly, blending moody, dark tracks with intense, pulse-pounding moments during combat. Running across Seattle's rooftops at night, neon signs flickering, snow-covered streets, city lights shimmering, and dark alleyways stretching below, the music brings it all to life. Even when the visuals or city scale sometimes falls a little short, the soundtrack keeps the tension and immersion fully intact. Bringing back Rick Schaefer's soundtrack from the original Bloodlines adds a wonderful layer of nostalgia. Those familiar motifs and haunting melodies instantly transport longtime fans back to the streets of Santa Monica, while still feeling fresh in the new setting of Seattle. It's a subtle touch, but it makes a big difference. Despite the letdown of some of the game mechanics, I honestly found myself pulled into the story of Bloodlines 2. It's surprisingly intricate, full of clever misdirection, big swings, sharp reveals, and enough political and personal intrigue that you're constantly second-guessing who to trust. Following Seattle's unique lore and digging into the detailed histories and the codex adds a sense of depth the gameplay itself doesn't always deliver. It makes the city feel lived in and gives the narrative a foundation that future games in the series could possibly build on. Some of the major reveals do feel like they come out of left field, but that might be because I didn't catch every subtle hint the game dropped earlier on. I was disappointed to see some characters show up with tons of potential, only to be yanked out of the story before you really had any chance to connect with them. They're introduced, they hint at a deeper motivation or a more complex role in the plot, and then boom, like pun intended, they're gone. I get that Bloodlines as a setting leans into sudden betrayals and violent ends, but here it feels less like a narrative gut punch and more like a lost opportunity. I wanted time to understand who these characters were, to build some kind of attachment so their deaths would land with weight. Instead, a few of them barely stick around long enough for you to remember their names before they're written out. It undercuts the emotional payoff the story was clearly aiming for. Even so, none of these nitpicks completely broke the experience for me. The story still manages to pull everything together in a way that feels somewhat earned. Despite the rough edges, the narrative lands its final beats well enough that I walked away satisfied. Not blown away, but satisfied. And I say somewhat earned because I'll admit I'm still conflicted about how much the dialogue choices actually matter in the long run. In my first playthrough, I went out of my way to take a specific narrative path, carefully choosing my words, appeasing a certain character, and trying to steer things toward a particular ending. But when I finally reached the late game decisions, it felt like a lot of that groundwork didn't actually pay off. A couple of key choices near the end seemed to override everything I'd done before, which left me wondering how much influence I really had on the outcome at all. Do our conversations actually matter? That's the question I kept circling back to. What's the point of navigating dialogue options, reading personalities, or trying to keep someone calm if their fate is already locked in? If a character is scripted to die, does it really matter whether they're irritated, enraged, or completely charmed by you in their final moments? And what's the payoff for choosing all the right things when the outcome refuses to budge? It's a shame because the story could have gone so much further if dialogue actually mattered in a meaningful way. Imagine if your choices shaped the endgame instead of funneling you down the same tunnel every time. What if siding with the Anarchs put you toe-to-toe with Lou Graham and the Camarilla? What if you could pull a character back from sliding into Sabbat territory and have them stand with you later on? What if whole story branches opened up based on the alliances you built or burned? That's the kind of narrative flexibility this world deserves. But instead, the game stays locked on rails. Nearly everything plays out the same, and the impact of your decisions doesn't really show up until after the final boss, which honestly is a pretty underwhelming payoff for a story that had the potential to go in so many directions. Now that's my takeaway. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's how the dialogue system hit me after finishing my first and even second run. Interpret it however you like. I know there are 6 endings, so dialogue does play a role, but the question is how much of what you say actually changes anything. Bloodlines 2 is a strange creature, half brilliant, half baffling. It stumbles where the original soars, stripping away beloved RPG systems, mechanical depth, and meaningful player agency. Yet at the same time, it introduces much more fluid movement and combat flow mechanics, atmosphere, and narrative beats that, when they click, absolutely do shine. It's a game constantly tugging at its own potential, sometimes hitting it dead on, other times tripping over its own design choices. This isn't the true sequel we waited 2 decades for. It's something else entirely. Narrower, rougher, and unmistakably shaped by a long, chaotic development cycle. And honestly, it shows. I don't think the Chinese room ever had the grounding in the universe they needed. They were juggling pressure from Paradox, pressure from the World of Darkness community, and the impossible task of resurrecting a project that was already limping. The whole thing feels rushed, and most of that lands squarely at Paradox's feet. They've mishandled this IP for years, and at this point it feels less like stewardship and more like they're sitting on the rights hoping Bloodlines 2 eventually pays back its cost. But even with all that noise and mismanagement, the game still shines in moments. There are flashes of style, atmosphere, and emotion that remind you why the World of Darkness can be such a gripping place. For all of its flaws, I don't regret buying the game, and I definitely plan on diving back in a few more times, though at a much quicker pace. I laughed, I raged, I got immersed, I got annoyed, and every so often it absolutely floored me. And that matters. If the developers commit to refining the systems that hold it back and doubling down on the parts that work, Bloodlines 2 could still evolve into something truly worthy of the name it carries. Or not. But as it stands today, it's an imperfect, ambitious, messy, and atmospheric vampiric tale, and depending on what you're hoping to get out of it, that just might be enough. Hey everybody, before I wrap this up, I want to say thank you, seriously, everyone who watched my blind playthrough, everyone who commented, debated, disagreed, or dove into the chaos of this game right along with me. You made the whole experience better. Sharing the highs, the lows, the confusion, and the what the hell was that moments with all of you is what keeps this channel fun. If you've got thoughts of your own about Bloodlines 2, and I've seen a lot of them already, good, bad, or somewhere in the middle, drop them in the comments. I read everything, and the discussions around this game have been some of the best I've ever had. And just like every other YouTube content creator out there, big or small, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss whatever chaos I get into next. Thanks again for being here. I'll see you on the next one.